Hi, my name is Spencer Bagley. I am a Red 15 Project NExT Fellow. I'm here to present to you my portion of today's panel, a talk which I am calling Grading and What to Do Instead. You can click on this link to access, or type in this link, I guess, to access my slides. There's a lot of other links in here that you might want to click on later. This in particular is a shorter version of a longer talk that is about an hour long YouTube recording called Ungrading as Resistance, which I gave as part of the Talk Math with Your Friends seminar. Lovely internet seminar that I would like to invite you to once it resumes in the fall. I come to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, which is land that we have seized from the Ute and Shoshone tribes. More on that in a minute. Here's sort of an outline of what I want to talk to you about today. I want to convince you that you should maybe be upset about grading and the way that it happens. I don't think that people like to make change to things that they've been doing for a long time until they believe that it is wrong in some way. I want to put a name to the tension that you might feel here and offer you some resolution, maybe instead of grading what you want as assessment. And then, because I believe that every good math talk should have an example in it, I'll provide you with my origin story, how I got started with alternative grading systems. Okay, so why should you be upset about grading? First of all, there's a whole host of bad effects that it has on students. I'm not going to really get into this much. There's an interesting research base here. You can read in these two links that I provided at the bottom of the screen, but I don't think that anything that you see on this slide is a particular surprise to you. I want to tell you a different story today, and that story is the story of resource extraction. I'd like to provide credit to my friend Dr. Blin Sinajine in New Mexico for this analysis. He gave a talk about this in a joint math meetings a couple of years ago that absolutely blew my socks off. The two foundational sins of America are indigenous genocide and chattel slavery, and honestly these are cut from the same cloth, which is the cloth of resource extraction. We participated in these horrible systems because we wanted resources that these people had. I'm going to make a claim that educational systems are, to some extent, part of the same grand enterprise of resource extraction, and in particular, higher education is this way. Because higher education helps you produce trained workers that you can extract labor from, highly skilled labor from, in a more efficient way. And the claim that I'm making that's relevant to our talk today is in particular that grading is an important part of the system. You might be raising your eyebrow at this point, and I don't blame you. Let me see if I can convince you. Here's some other stuff that we grade. We grade oil. We grade maple syrup. We grade cows. That's actually not true. We grade beef. All of these things are commodities, and we provide grades to them for particular reasons. And let me talk to you about what those reasons are and drill in on the specific example of beef. I've got an interesting link here, which is a explainer of beef grading. I'm not going to say any of these words, but I'm just going to scroll through and does this remind you of a syllabus? I think the degree to which this reminds you of a syllabus is a degree to which you should be upset about what we are doing. Okay, what are we doing with this? Quality grades are a way for beef producers and beef consumers to communicate more efficiently about what they are getting. If you have beef that is labeled choice, you know that you are going to braise it, and if it's labeled prime, then you know you're going to grill it and whatever. I don't actually know if that's true. I got the words wrong probably, but you get the idea. What the grades of beef are is they're a way that we can communicate more efficiently about the commodity that we are trying to buy and sell. So therefore, these are things that lubricate the business of resource extraction. Coming back to that point. Incidentally, the way that the beef industry got the idea to use grades was because of schools, so that's fun. I want to give you an extremely compressed history of grading in the United States. You can read much more about this at the links at the top there. Let's say that by the end of World War II, the grading system is pretty much recognizable to the modern day. So K-12 schools are using grades to track students as they move between grades and between states and across the country. Colleges are using grades in their admissions decisions, and employers are using grades in their hiring decisions. And so what has happened is that we have commodified a student. And I'm a little bit upset about that already. What we are doing is we are lubricating the business of resource extraction in terms of labor out of students. I have probably made you feel bad at this point, and I'm honestly right there with you. This is a system that I don't particularly want to participate in, but I somehow feel forced to. I'm really sorry about this, but also, I'm not sorry, because I think once you feel bad about something, you can start to see why you might want to change it. So here is our first pause for questions. Take a couple of minutes and talk about this. What are the things that upset you about grading? And I don't think that you have to, parrot any of the things that I've said here. What are the things that you've noticed as you've been working in this project that make you upset? All right, so let's go ahead and resume. Here's my sort of next chunk of that advanced organizer that I showed you about 5 minutes ago, which is I want to put a name to the tension that you are feeling, and I want to help you resolve it. Here's the tension. There is a tension between that which promotes learning and that which enables a massive system to function. And guess what? Okay, so here they are, right? Over on the left-hand side of the screen, I've got a bunch of things that are things that enable a massive system to function. And over on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got the messy, human, and complicated business of learning. I feel like we sometimes feel that we are forced to choose between these two. That if we try to get rid of the one, we immediately lose the other, right? We got to push one of these buttons and only one. And my suggestion is that I think we can hit both of these buttons at the same time. I think what will help us to do this, though, is to separate these two lists. Over here, all of this stuff that's about communicating with external stakeholders and enabling a large system to function appropriately, I'm going to call this grading. And for the sake of giving it a different name, I'm going to call all of this other stuff, all this stuff about learning, I'm going to call it assessment. People use these words in different ways. This is a non-standard usage, but I think it is useful to separate these two categories in your head. Okay, so here's a lovely quote from Jesse Stommel, who is a very thoughtful person who talks about ungrading a lot. I highly recommend this entire article that I've linked at the bottom, but here's an important blurb from it. I don't think that we can change the large system of grading. It's too big and we're small. What we can do is we can create an environment in which students can start to think about why they are being graded when they are being graded. And I think that that's the kind of grassroots thing that might help disrupt the system eventually. So that's really what I'm after here. I am after small resistance and helping students resist. So I have two questions for you immediately that I'd like you to think about throughout the rest of this presentation and the rest of this panel indeed. What is actually required, first of all? We probably don't think that we can not grade people because we have to give letter grades at the end of the term. Sure. What is the hard requirement? And what are the things that you care about, and how can you get those to happen while satisfying your institutional requirements? Here's another video I made for Project NExT last year, I guess, maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember. It's about a minute long. I have more hair in that video. And my key message in that video is that you have more latitude than you might think you do. And you might think about some creative insubordination. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm an idealist, I'm a hippie, and I have permissive bosses who let me get away with a lot of stuff. So your mileage may, of course, vary, but I do think you can do more than you think you might be able to. I want to take a brief detour here, and I've stolen some slides from myself, another presentation that I gave about the relationship between assessment and learning. I want to focus in particular on the idea of metacognition. Now, this is a word that you have probably heard a bunch over the last little while in your Project NExT experiences. What is metacognition? It is thinking about your own thinking. It is monitoring your learning, knowing what is hard for you, what you're good at. The incredible tome How People Learn, which is a synthesis of almost 100 years worth of educational research, says that one of their 3 key takeaways of the entire research body is that the most effective kind of instruction is instruction that promotes metacognition. Okay, so here's my upshot. If you build your assessments appropriately so that they provoke metacognition, then they will actually provoke learning, which is cool. I'd also like to, just to put these words in the air, I'd like to say something about formative and summative assessment, which are probably also words that you have been thinking about as part of Project NExT. What is formative assessment? It's low stakes. It's a place for you to give your students feedback. It's a place for students to assess and learn and improve their own learning process. What is summative assessment? That's your midterms and your finals. It is a definitive measure of how much is in a student's brain at a particular moment in time. Okay, here then is a diagram of a bunch of stuff that I think is interesting about formative assessment. You can see I've got a link here where I got this from. I recommend looking at that entire presentation because I think it's lovely. So here's our second pause for questions. I'd like you to just sit here and look at this diagram and see which of these things you are excited about happening in your own classroom. And relatedly, I would like you to think about, with the definition of grading that I have proposed, what does any of this have to do with grading? Okay, that's a pause for questions. All right, so here we come into the last 5 minutes of the talk, which is the example portion of the talk. I'd like to give you my origin story with alternative grading systems, or in other words, my answer to the question, what radicalized you? I want to give you a brief plug for a new newsletter that is coming out. It's called Grading for Growth. That's the title of a book that is coming out that is written by Robert Talbert, I guess edited by Robert Talbert and David Clark, who are two of my favorite math professor Twitter pals. Highly recommended. These two have, the first two entries in this newsletter are these two origin stories, which I think are very nice to think about. Okay, here's mine. I was teaching a calculus class where we were using these labs. A guy by the name of Mike Ortman, who is now at Oklahoma State, wrote these labs that are designed to help students understand the conceptual ins and outs of calculus before we really drill in on the procedural aspects. When I say that we spent hours grading people's submissions on these things, I do mean hours, and I do mean we. There was a whole team of us spending hours on this. We're writing very careful feedback, trying to help people engage with these ideas, but also we had a point system, right? And so students would make a collection of small mistakes, and they would lose a point here and half a point there, and those kind of added up in a way that was demotivating to students and made them sad, right? Like a pretty good assignment, a student is missing a plus sign here and they dropped a negative there, and they forgot a factor of 2, and you know, by the time all that is over, a pretty good assignment has a 15 out of 20 on the top of the page. That's a 75%, and to a lot of students that looks like a C, and they are going to cram that in their folder and never look at it again, which means that the hours plural that I spent writing really careful feedback were completely pointless. Students never looked at it. And that's frustrating, certainly. But what made me sadder is that students were just bouncing off these beautiful ideas of calculus. And I know that's a math nerd thing to say, but I know that you get it because you're math nerds too. Students were remaining disengaged with these ideas. They were getting a really surface level understanding that was, you know, oh, I understand this about 75% of the way, and I guess that's all I'll ever do. So this was unsustainable for me. I hated spending all of this time in a way that felt so unprofitable to me. So here's what I ended up doing. I was inspired by a blog post by Robert Talbert, the aforementioned, to use what's called specs-based grading, and how this works. Much more on this in your breakout rooms. The instructor creates a list of specifications for work that is good in this class. And this isn't a rubric on an assignment level. It is a general principles kind of document. Like, here are the things that I like to see that tell me that a proof is good or whatever. And work is either going to meet those specs or not. And there's no such thing as partial credit. But what there is such a thing as is revisions. The instructor is going to provide detailed feedback on each student submission, and then the students can revise according to the feedback that the instructor gives, and then resubmit that submission, and eventually demonstrate that they can produce work that meets the specifications. How do you determine a final letter grade? I made this a little more complicated than it necessarily has to be. I was bundling up this many assignments in this category and that category, and I tacked on some weighting because I wasn't ready to let go of, I think exams should still count more or whatever. Okay. So how did this go? Students actually cared about my feedback, which was incredible. And the reason why they did is because the system allows them to do something about it, to respond meaningfully to the feedback. So that was great, and I suddenly felt a lot better about all the time that I was spending writing this careful feedback. On the downside, I got absolutely buried in rewrites. I had to modify the system and iteratively change it. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, and I'm on step, 5 or 6 now, of various refinements and modifications to my grading system. So then here's my sales pitch, right? That's my origin story. Here's my sales pitch. I believe that this is a way that we can resist the commodification of our students, and to give them a reason to care about feedback rather than just points. And then as a side benefit, that means that we probably feel better about the time we spend grading. I suspect that you have more latitude to change things than you think you do. And I'll leave it to the capable experts that you'll be spending time in breakout rooms with to sort of hammer out some logistics there. But I want to close by saying that you don't have to dive into the deep end with this. You can just try something out, and if it doesn't work in a way that you think is good, you can change it next semester. You get to be in charge of this stuff. Okay, that's my presentation. This is the end. Thank you very much. I wish that I could hear your questions and comments right now, but through the magic of the internet, I can hear them anyway. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm at sbagley, or send me an email, sbagley@westminstercollege.edu. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to chatting with you through the magic of the internets.